Today, an FDA approval for a biosimilar, a proposed change to drug prices by President Donald Trump, and highlights from a Presscast held ahead of the 2018 ASCO Annual Meeting. Welcome to Enclave News Network. I'm Gina Columbus. The FDA has approved epoetin alpha EPBX, known by the trade name Retacrit, for the treatment of anemia caused by chronic kidney disease, chemotherapy, or use of zidovudine in patients with HIV infection. The biosimilar is also indicated for use prior to and following surgery to reduce the likelihood that patients will need a red blood cell transfusion caused by blood loss from surgery. The FDA's Oncologic Drugs Advisory Committee voted 14-1, recommending approval of a biologics license application for epoetin alpha EPBX in May 2017. Hospira, the manufacturer of the biosimilar, submitted the application based on results from two single-center randomized open-label studies, EPOE 1202 and EPOE 1401. The first trial was aimed to establish the pharmacokinetics and pharmacodynamics of epoetin alpha EPBX following a single subcutaneous dose in 81 healthy patients. EPOE 1401 was designed to determine the drug's PK and PD following multiple doses of subcutaneous epoetin alpha EPBX 3 times weekly for 4 weeks in 129 patients. Epoetin alpha EPBX was compared with epoetin alpha in both trials. Results of both studies showed that epoetin alpha EPBX met the pre-specified acceptance criteria for similarity. President Donald Trump announced a sweeping blueprint to lower prescription drug costs, promising to expand access to generic drugs and biosimilars and remove incentives that keep drug prices high. The plan comprises an FDA evaluation of whether drug manufacturers should be required to list prices in their advertising, as well as longer-term efforts to change the imbalance between what U.S. consumers pay for drugs developed in the United States versus what foreigners pay in their own countries, where drug prices are often significantly lower. The 44-page plan, which is titled American Patients First, includes 50 different actions and proposals based on 4 key strategies: increase competition, encourage drug price negotiation, create incentives to lower list prices, and lower out-of-pocket costs. The FDA issued a statement following Trump's speech that the agency is promising to improve the overall generic drug review process and reduce the cycles of review required for generic drugs. The FDA said it has taken steps to streamline the submission process for generic drug applicants and prioritize the review of certain generics. ASCO held a Presscast ahead of the 2018 annual meeting this week, highlighting research on cancer screening, treatment, and symptom management. Results of the randomized Phase 3 Persephone trial showed that a shorter 6-month course of adjuvant trastuzumab was found to be non-inferior for disease-free survival versus the standard 12-month course for patients with HER2-positive early breast cancer. 5-year follow-up showed that the 4-year DFS rate was 89.8% with 12 months of trastuzumab versus 89.4% with the 6-month course, which met the criteria for non-inferiority. In addition to improvements in DFS, the number of patients stopping treatment due to cardiac toxicity was cut in half with the shorter duration of trastuzumab. Overall, 8% of those enrolled in the 12-month group discontinued treatment with trastuzumab due to cardiotoxicity, compared with just 4% in the 6-month group. The Persephone study, which began enrolling in 2007, will continue to follow patients to determine whether there is a benefit for overall survival. In metastatic lung cancer, another study released during the Presscast showed that next-generation sequencing, or NGS, can save Center for Medicare and Medicaid Services payers $1.4 to $2.1 million. Additionally, NGS was found to save commercial insurance providers more than $250,000. The economic impact of NGS was compared against sequential, exclusionary, and panel testing strategies. For NGS and panel, the estimated time to receive results was 2 weeks, which is 2.7 and 2.8 weeks faster than exclusionary and sequential, respectively. For hypothetical 1 million member health plans, investigators suggested that 2,066 tests would be paid for by CMS and 156 would be paid for by commercial insurers. This is based on the age and number of people in the United States with metastatic non-small cell lung cancer. Using CMS reimbursement, NGS represented savings of $1,393,678 versus exclusionary, $1,530,869 versus sequential, and $2,140,795 versus panel, investigators noted. Moreover, NGS was the least expensive testing modality by $3,809 versus exclusionary, $127,402 versus sequential, and $250,842 versus panel. A third study discussed during the Presscast revealed that 1.9% of more than 7.6 million current and former heavy smokers in the United States underwent lung cancer screening in 2016, suggesting that it remains inadequate despite recommendations from the United States Preventative Services Task Force. The USPSTF calls for annual low-dose CT scans in patients ages 55 to 80 years who are current or former heavy smokers. Overall, results showed that while a total 1,796 screening centers could have screened 7,612,975 current and former heavy smokers, only 141,260 people underwent low-dose CT scans, leading to a 1.9% national screening rate. Data showed that the Northeast had the highest screening rate at 3.5%, followed by the Midwest at 1.9%. Moreover, the South region had 663 accredited screening sites, the largest of the four regions, and the highest number of smokers eligible for screening at 3,072,095. However, the screening rate here was 1.6%, determined to be the second lowest screening rate in the country. In the West, findings showed that this region had the lowest number of accredited screening sites and the lowest screening rate at 1.0%. Additionally, 85% of the current smokers who did have low-dose CT scans were offered smoking cessation resources. This week, we sat down with Dr. Matthew S. Davids of Dana-Farber Cancer Institute to discuss approaching therapy for patients with relapsed refractory CLL.
In the relapsed refractory setting, we have a wide variety of options available to us now. Historically, we've used chemoimmunotherapy for the most part in the frontline setting, and the old teaching was depending on the durability of response to initial chemoimmunotherapy, that would inform the choice of the next line of therapy. So when patients got 4 or 5 years of benefit from their initial chemotherapy-based regimen, we would typically turn back to chemotherapy again in the second line setting, knowing that the response might be a little bit less durable, but still expecting the patient to do well. However, I would say this has changed quite dramatically over the last couple of years with the advent of these novel agents, which are highly effective and also very well tolerated for the patients in the relapsed refractory population. So certainly the first step in this group, if they have not previously had deletion 17p, is to retest the FISH, because if they've acquired deletion 17p, then they certainly need a novel agent-based approach, and I would not advocate using chemotherapy for those patients. It's a little more complicated outside of the setting of deletion 17p. I do think chemoimmunotherapy is still reasonable to consider for those patients. I think if practitioners are going to make those recommendations, they should be aware of the data from the Helios study and the 115 study, which looked at combinations of ibrutinib and idelalisib, respectively, with bendamustine and rituximab in the relapsed refractory population. So if you're thinking about using a bendamustine and rituximab regimen for relapsed patients, you should think about it in combination with one of those two kinase inhibitors. However, I would say I use chemotherapy quite rarely now in the relapsed population, and most of my patients will go on a novel agent-only based approach. And for most patients right now, ibrutinib is the easiest drug to start with. It has the longest track record in terms of the durability of response, and so I think it's a great option for many patients with relapsed refractory disease. However, there are some patients who have particular comorbidities that might make it challenging to receive ibrutinib, and those might include patients with poorly controlled atrial fibrillation or other cardiac issues, particularly if they're on anticoagulation or have other bleeding risks. And for those patients, drugs like idelalisib and rituximab or venetoclax are potentially good options to consider. Right now, venetoclax is only approved for patients with relapsed deletion 17p disease. However, we saw some really exciting data at the ASH meeting from the Murano study that looked at venetoclax and rituximab in the relapse setting compared to bendamustine and rituximab. And we saw dramatic improvements with the venetoclax-based regimen in terms of both progression-free and overall survival. And this was just recently published in the New England Journal of Medicine, and I think is likely to lead to a more broad approval for venetoclax and rituximab in the relapsed refractory population.
That's all for today. Thank you for watching Enclave News Network. I'm Gina Columbus.